If you picture those professionals all on that wheel, they're usually not all A players. They're not talking to each other. They're not collaborating. No one's holding them accountable. But the worst part is the entrepreneur sits in the middle of that wheel managing that team, whether they know it or not.
One of the main problems that we see for our entrepreneurs who have that financial flat tire is they're getting crushed by taxes.
For people to say they don't want to own life insurance, it would depend on their situation. But often life insurance is a product that people need to own.
Constantly, entrepreneurs have no asset protection plan, and there's nothing scarier than building a very successful business and building wealth and the thought that with one lawsuit, they can all disappear. All right, Jim, we're back. The book club continues, episode 3.
Yes.
Today, we're going to talk about why entrepreneurs need a fractional family office. So I'm really excited. This gets into the problem statement that our firm aims to solve or does solve, and brings up a lot of the issues that we see all the time in entrepreneurs.
Yep, it's a big problem.
Let's start with the flat tire, the financial flat tire. This is an image that shows, I'll let you describe it in more depth, the financial flat tire. It's on our website, and this is something that hooks in every entrepreneur who feels these pains so acutely. So walk us through, what is the financial flat tire, and how did you come up with the motivation even to visually design this?
This is page 47 if you're following along with your book. And this is really the problem that all entrepreneurs face, and really the reason for our company to exist. And that is, over an entrepreneur's lifetime, they pick up a bunch of different professionals, a bunch of different advisors. So if you picture a wheel, or if you're looking in your book at the financial flat tire, if you look at a wheel and you think of those advisors like spokes on the wheel, that could be your accountant, your insurance agent, your banker, your corporate attorney, your estate attorney. If you picture those professionals all on that wheel, they're usually not all A players. They're not talking to each other. They're not collaborating. No one's holding them accountable. But the worst part is the entrepreneur sits in the middle of that wheel managing that team, whether they know it or not, when they don't have the time or the expertise in the areas like tax, legal, insurance, and investment. And that causes a lot of problems. But that's where Mimi and I found ourselves in the middle of that wheel. And that's where we said, there's got to be something better.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that illustrates is there's a lot of problems that come with having the financial flat tire. And so one of the main problems that we see for our entrepreneurs who have that financial flat tire is they're getting crushed by taxes. And so this is one of the pain points that sometimes they'll acutely feel is like, why am I writing 6 to 7 figure checks every year to the IRS? Maybe they have a CPA. Everyone does have a CPA. But then the issue is a lot of those CPAs are what we call tax historians, not tax planners. So they're always looking in the rearview mirror, collecting documentation, reviewing the 1099s, the K1s, building your business and your personal tax return, and saying, all right, hey, Jim, you owe, $280,000 on April 15th. And don't forget your Q1 estimated payment of $400,000. And I'll see you again next year. Here's my bill for $5,000. And so one of the biggest issues that we see is the tax as being a silent killer. What's another issue that you see as a product of having a financial flat tire?
Well, one other thing that's not in the book, but just to be aware of, is taxes are such a pain point for entrepreneurs. They look for solutions. Many times the traditional CPAs, as you said, are historians. And now there's this new category out there called a tax strategist. And I would just tell the listeners to be very cautious for the tax strategist. And often they get charged a flat fee, but then that hides other ways they get paid. A percentage of taxes that they save you, referral fees for introductions that they make. That type of structure encourages that person to put you in the most aggressive strategies possible. And that can make sense, but guess what? You are responsible as the taxpayer for any penalties, interest, or if the IRS says that it's actually criminal and you've committed fraud, they're going to hold you accountable no matter what you said your tax strategist had told you. If you have someone like that who's pushing you to do things that are aggressive, not letting you get second opinions, be very careful about what they call a tax strategist. I know that's an aside, but it's just important because I see it going on a lot right now. Other stuff that they have to worry about is just the lack of coordination. So often the professionals are in silos. The attorney does the legal work. The accountant does the tax work. The insurance agent does the insurance work. The investment person does the investment piece. And what happens is all of these things intertwine. They're not just solo type things that need to get done for the entrepreneur. And when they're not coordinated, there end up problems, mistakes, omissions, and missed opportunities.
Yeah, and building on top of that, asset protection lack thereof, another common side effect here, because again, no one is collaborating. And so maybe you as an entrepreneur start a new business, maybe you reach out to your commercial insurance agent and you get a new policy in place, but is that entity set up the right way? Is it titled in the right trust? Are you protecting the corporate veil? There's all of these different things that if you as the entrepreneur are in the middle of that wheel, right, that broken financial flat tire, you are responsible as the entrepreneur to coordinate all these different professionals. And that oftentimes leads you exposed to creditors and predators when it comes to asset protection. So I think that's another big gap that we see quite often, is that constantly entrepreneurs have no asset protection plan. And there's nothing scarier than building a very successful business and building wealth and the thought that with one lawsuit, it can all disappear.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of instances. I think one, I remember we had a client that sold her home in Florida and bought a home in California. Well, Florida has unlimited homestead protection. California has very limited asset protection. And then obviously had to get new homeowners insurance. And the new agent out in California didn't know, and so did like minimum coverage on liability. So she went from a $10 million umbrella on a home that was completely protected to a home that was almost completely unprotected with almost no liability coverage on the home. And that was because everyone wasn't talking. No one was talking to the people that actually knew the balance sheet and how much money there was. No one was thinking about asset protection. You had the realtors, you had insurance agents, but no one was coordinating the whole thing to make sure that the protection was there.
Yeah, another thing I'd say is oftentimes having a financial flat tire, you end up investing like Main Street and not like billionaires. And when we look and study at how billionaires deploy their capital, they're invested around 50, 60% in what we'd call publicly traded assets. Think of stocks, think of bonds, cash, but 40 to 50% is going to be in private market. And this is going to be real estate, hedge funds, commodities, currencies, private equity, venture capital, all of those other asset classes. Yet if you go down the street and you talk to a Main Street advisor, they're going to put you in a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio, slap a 1% fee and put you on your way. How come the smartest and the richest people in the world, their allocations look completely different than that? And it's just because, again, this is a huge opportunity, a huge gap for business owners. They're investing like Main Street.
Yeah, and I'll give a little plug for our friend Bob Frazier, who has a book, Invest Like a Billionaire, that talks about private markets and how often those are being overlooked by the average entrepreneur investor. And today there's more access than ever before. 20, 30 years ago when I started in the business, there was very little access to private investments. Now there's a lot. Now you still have to be careful in that area because there's a lot of private investments that are risky or are expensive or have not been vetted. However, it's important to start looking beyond the public markets to actually get a truly diversified portfolio that's going to grow over time.
Yep. Another thing that I would add, stack on top of this, is what is the ROI you're getting from your professional team? As you mentioned in the beginning, when you have this financial flat tire, you've accumulated this team of professionals probably since you graduated college or you left the house. You get your first insurance agent. And then over time, you may have upgraded your CPA a few times as your business gets bigger and bigger. Maybe you have a wealth manager or financial advisor, but you don't know if these people are good. And you've never actually probably looked at how much is this person making off of me? And what is the return on investment I'm getting from this person? Now, whenever someone brings me as the managing partner here a new idea, I'm always like, okay, I understand there's an investment in the cost, but I need to understand what's the upside. What's the return on investment? What kind of multiple am I going to receive on this? And looking at your team of your professionals should be the exact same way, because if you're not getting a positive return on investment, well, let's go to first principles. Why are we even working with this individual who's on our team?
Yep, very true. Should we move into why traditional advice doesn't work too well?
Yes, I know that you were chomping at the bit.
I was.
So let's jump into here. I'll let you kick it off. We know now there's a lot of problems with this financial flat tire. The issue is that in society, there's not a lot of ways to get all these problems fixed because there's a lot of conflicts of interest and issues with the existing structure. So take us through, Jim, a few of these issues as you're looking at, like, all right, if you're an entrepreneur, how could you try to solve this problem?
Yeah, and I would say that financial advisors often could be a spoke on the wheel, but the hub needs to be a very specific firm that handles these types of structures, these fractional family offices. So let's talk about the problem with traditional financial advisors. Did you know, I was just reading this the other day, that approximately 834,000 people in America refer to themselves as a financial advisor, wealth manager, wealth advisor, financial planner, a title of that nature. I also was looking, how many are actually pure fiduciaries? What percentage do you think?
25.
It's a little over 4.
4%.
Yeah, so it's about 1 in 25 are actual true fiduciaries.
Explain what a fiduciary is.
A fiduciary is someone who has a legal standard that has to put your interests ahead of their own. Here's the problem, because I talk to financial advisors all the time, and I have yet to meet one in the last 5 years that says to me, Jim, I'm not a fiduciary. They all say I'm a fiduciary. Here's the truth. Most of them are fiduciaries part of the time. And, I like to say, I've been with Mimi for 37 years. In fact, today was the day I asked her to marry me in 1991.
St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, see, that's what I remember.
Yeah, smart.
And I'm not wearing green, which in elementary school would have meant I got beat up. But luckily today, I don't have to worry so much about that. At any rate, if I said to Mimi, I am faithful most of the time. I mean, Vegas sometimes, or a boys trip, or, occasionally something goes, but, I'm faithful. How do you think that would go over?
Not well.
Not well. And the same thing is, you don't want a partial fiduciary, a fiduciary some of the time. You want a fiduciary all of the time. And it's funny, this disconnect, because when people were surveyed, 65% of people with a financial advisor said my financial advisor is a fiduciary, and yet only about 1 in 25 are actually true fiduciaries. Here's the other thing. Even a true fiduciary can get paid commissions from certain types of products, can get referral fees, can get different compensation that you would think they can't get. It just has to be disclosed in a big document that nobody reads. So I think one of the questions, if I'm listening to this call, that you should ask anyone who's working with you, who's in the financial arena, is just send me in something in writing that says you're a fiduciary for me in all circumstances and at all times. And then you might uncover that maybe it's a little bit surprising. The other issue, especially with having these types of advisors in the middle of the wheel, is the conflicts of interest, but also the AUM model. The most popular model for financial advice is the assets under management model. And I see why. You and I have talked about this before. It's one of the greatest business structures ever created. Because once they get your assets and they put their 1% fee or whatever it is on there, every year, let's assume your portfolio goes up 7 to 10% a year. Guess what their compensation does every year? Goes up 7 to 10%. Not at inflation, but better than inflation. The funds are sticky because it's hard to find out where where to move your money. If you have capital gains embedded, it's even harder to move your money. So that model has shown that clients are sticky. I hate to say this, but it doesn't take that much work, and you get paid great and your income increases. The reason why you need to be concerned and why the person in the middle of your wheel shouldn't be someone trying to gather your assets all the time is because it creates all these conflicts of interest. If I'm an entrepreneur, I own my building, I run my business out of there. If I say, hey, should I pay off my building loan? Is it better for the advisor if I don't and keep the money in the portfolio? Absolutely it is. So you have a conflict. Let's say I want to give a big chunk of money to charity. Same problem. Let's say I want to give something to my kids. Same problem. Let's say I want to invest in ways that they don't get paid. Same problem. So you have all these conflicts, and that's why often in the private markets that we already discussed, private markets aren't promoted much by traditional advisors because they can't get paid on those, so they don't want to promote those things. So anyway, those are a lot of conflicts in the assets under management model, and there is a better way, but that's some of the challenges with traditional financial advisors.
Yeah, I think just building on that, even a lot of people who have, like you said, 864,000 is what you said?
834,000.
So of the 834,000 that have that title, a good chunk of them are what I would call insurance agents. Because oftentimes you go and look at a Northwestern Mutual, or someone's backed by one of these big insurance agents. They call themselves a financial advisor, but really what they're doing is they're out looking, who can I sell a whole life policy or some sort of overfunded permanent life insurance policy, because I get paid roughly 100% of the first year premiums as a commission. Once I land that client, I don't really need to ever talk to them again because, again, I'm not a fiduciary. I just have to give them a suitable investment. So oftentimes we have entrepreneurs come to us that have been sold whole life policies, and maybe they're paying $100,000 to $500,000 a year in premiums. And you say, that insurance agent, or let's call them the advisor, made maybe $100,000 to $500,000 commission upfront when you wired that first check in. And of course they don't know that because their commissions are not disclosed, and there's conflicts of interest with that. So I think that as we further talk through some of the issues with the financial advisor title or wealth manager, are they affiliated with a big insurance company? Like you said, are they a fiduciary at all times? And oftentimes we'll see life insurance agents disguised wearing the cape of a financial advisor.
Along those lines of the insurance agents too, a lot of entrepreneurs don't know that commissions can be really should be disclosed and can be negotiated down. And when we work, because life insurance is a tool and sometimes it's the right tool. And for people to say they don't want to own life insurance, it would depend on their situation. But often life insurance is a product that people need to own. However, we require commissions disclosed and negotiated whenever we're working with an insurance agent who would be a spoke on the wheel, so to speak.
Yep. We talked about tax strategists, the issues that comes into play. Most CPAs, they do great work, but just their incentive structure is to file tax returns and to keep you compliant with the Internal Revenue Code and the Internal Revenue Service. And so if you think about that traditional model, they're going to be tax historians. They collect all the documents, they file the tax returns, they send you on your way. That's oftentimes what results in you paying way too much in taxes. So then the flip side is now there's this cohort of tax strategists who want to get paid a commission or a percentage of the tax savings while pushing all of the execution risk and all the tax risk onto you as the taxpayer, because you are the one who are signing the validity of the tax return that everything is true. So there, again, is a risk transfer there that they're getting paid for. So that's the tax piece. Let's what is another issue that we have in terms of when it comes to potentially having attorneys be in the middle of the wheel here?
Well, attorneys often are billed by the hour, and it reminds me of the old joke about the 35-year-old attorney that's out jogging. He's in great shape. He drops dead from a heart attack, goes up to the pearly gates, and he says, "St. Peter, there must be a problem. I'm healthy. I run every day, and I'm only 35 years old." And St. Peter says, "Well, according to your billable hours, you're 95." There's my attorney joke. But, attorneys go by the hour and sometimes by the part of the hour, and that can stack up. And then that also prevents you from calling when you need advice. And attorneys generally don't have a lot of experience with things like insurance, investments. They're very good in the legal. Depending if they're a tax attorney or not, they may or may not know some about tax. They're usually not the right for the middle of the wheel. And that's another thing that I think we should make clear is, the middle of the wheel has to be well-versed in all these areas and has to go deep. So I can't tell you how many times I have had other professionals from other, let's say, brokerage firms say, "Oh yeah, we do that." And I said, "Oh, really?" So you take the tax return, you go into it in great detail, you run projections, you go to the CPA, you talk about strategy, you come up with tactics. "Oh, no, we don't really look at the tax returns." Well, you go through the insurance policies, right? You read through all the coverages, you talk to the agent, you decide whether to shop it, you help the agent decide what kind of coverages. "Oh, well, we don't read through the insurance policies." "Oh," and then you also look through every type of loan that they're taking and the terms, and you talk to the banker, and and on and on. You look through the legal documents, you talk to the attorney, you make sure it's reflecting the vision of the entrepreneur. And so to be in the middle of the wheel, you have to know something about all these areas, and you have to go deep with each area and deep with each professional. And that is something that's very rare, because I've seen a lot of AUM firms that say they do this because they know entrepreneurs want this, but don't actually do the work. It's really the old asset management program, assets under management, with this new wrinkle of the marketing. And I always say that that's like putting lipstick on a pig. It doesn't really change that it's a pig.
So if you're an entrepreneur, then two different people are telling you the exact same thing. How do you know who can actually do the work, who can execute this, who can be at the center of your fractional family office versus someone who's maybe more of a charlatan saying that they can, but really has ulterior motives?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I'd look at testimonials, because entrepreneur testimonials will tell you what kind of experience they're getting. And second, I would ask harder to answer questions. Things like, tell me what you do when you review the tax return. Tell me how you review an insurance policy. Tell me what you do in concert with the attorney. Asking some open-ended questions, because someone who does this work is going to go deep on each of those subjects and be able to tell you specific things that they do for clients on a regular basis. If it's just lipstick on a pig, they're going to fall short when you say, "Walk me through the tax return, walk me through the 1040, the 1120. Tell me what you're actually doing as far as tax advice and how you work with my CPA to get this stuff done."
Yeah, and I think another thing is test before you buy, right? What can we do ahead of time? What can you add value to me as the entrepreneur so I can see what you're capable of? And of course, I'll compensate you for that upfront test before we drive. But before I get into a long-term relationship, let me see what your clear motives are and what your clear capabilities are.
I like that. Test before you drive.
Test before you drive.
Or
Okay.
wait. Test before you buy.
Test before you buy. There you
Drive
go.
before you buy.
So we talked about the problem statement with the financial flat tire, having this discoordinated team of professionals that you've accumulated over time. We talked about the problems that it's created. And now we just covered how all of the existing solutions don't work. So this was kind of part of your journey. We went to the $1 Million Wake Up at the very beginning of our book club experience. Now tie that into how you came up with this fractional family office model.
Yeah, I was hearing I always like to learn and grow and get new ideas. And I started hearing this term family office being thrown out there. And just to give you an idea, when I used to speak at events years ago, once I learned about the family office, and I would ask a room full of business owners, how many of you know what a family office is? If there were 100 in the room, I might get 2 hands. Today, if I do it, I probably get 80 hands. So it's really changed just the awareness of the family office. But at the time, no one was talking about this. So I started asking people I knew, asking people I respected, and I was getting a lot of blank stares. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You mean like an office building? What do you, and so because I couldn't get any real answers, I kept asking. And by chance, I got introduced through my network to the grandson of a New York billionaire. We got to be friends. He and I are the same age within a few months. And I started just peppering him with questions about the family office. And finally, he stopped and said, wait, are you trying to meet my grandfather, the billionaire, or are you trying to learn about how the family office runs? And I said, hey, with all due respect to your grandfather, I want to know how the family office runs. He goes, well, shoot, why don't you just fly to New York and I'll get you a meeting with our CEO? Done. So I fly to New York. I remember I meet this gentleman at a private club in Manhattan, not my private club, obviously, and we have a breakfast. And he was really old, probably like I am now. You know, I just thought this guy was really old, but he was cool. He was very smart. And a breakfast turned into 3.5 hours. And at the end of the 3.5 hours, he said, Jim, you really are interested in this stuff. You're excited about this stuff. Tell you what, I've got to go to some other meetings, but if you want to change your flights and stay for a few days, I'll show you what we do. So I jumped at the chance, spent a few days with the family and learned how they set things up and how they ran things. And on the way home, I had all these notes, and I was on the flight coming back to Phoenix, and it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought, wait a second, that's not just the best structure for a billionaire, that's the best structure for any entrepreneur. But then I knew there was one big problem, and that was the expense. Way too expensive to hire all those people, to have them housed in one place, all the setup. So I thought, well, I wonder, because Mimi and I wanted that for ourselves, I wonder if there's a way to create a structure where we'd get similar outcomes, but it would be affordable for us. And that was the moment when we started down the journey of creating not only the functional wealth wheel from the financial flat tire, and that's how we got to it.
And then from there, you have this vision. You then say, hey, I'm going to test this out on myself.
Yeah.
So walk us through that journey before you kind of productize the service, which is now what we've got with our fractional family office today.
So my first thing was, okay, I've got to have a team of 8 players, which I probably don't. I've got to coordinate the team. And at the time, because I knew a lot about tax, legal, insurance, and investment, I knew I had to be the center of the wheel. But I knew that ultimately that was a role that our firm would take if we could get it figured out. So I started going to the different professionals. And the first thing I did was I found out that I didn't have a good personal lines insurance agent. So by switching over, the first thing I found out is I had a gap because I was using a broker that had a different insurance company for the autos and a different insurance company for the home. So our umbrella was with the home. So I had a $1 million umbrella at the time, but my stop of liability occurred at I believe it was $200,000 on the car, and it didn't get picked up till $500,000 on the home. So I had a $300,000 gap. So if I had a big problem in the liability area, I was out of pocket $300,000. So that I shored up. I also saved money with the insurance agent. I realized that I had problems with my estate plan, with our entity structure, so I shored that up. And then on taxes, I hired a tax attorney, paid him $40,000, and he created a tax plan for me based on my situation. And Mimi and I saved $178,000 in taxes that first year. So it was multiple areas all over the place. And by the way, I was in finance. I was a financial advisor. I had been helping people invest their money for many years. So I knew a lot. And yet I didn't have a coordinated team. There was no accountability, and I wasn't getting the outcomes that I wanted. And so that's what we first created, and that realized that we could do that with others with the deep knowledge of all those areas. And I went deep with each of those professionals to learn even more about how I could implement this, not just for myself, but for others.
Yeah, and fast forward to today and where we're at now as we build Fractional Family Office for hundreds of entrepreneur clients that we work with. The emphasis today is really on making rich real, which is what we talked about last chapter, of having that clear, compelling vision of where you want to go and why. And then we help our entrepreneurs protect, manage, and grow their wealth. So all of the different tactics, the strategies, and the stuff that we leave for our entrepreneurs is underneath those three big umbrellas of protecting their wealth, asset protection, wealth transfer, time energy shield, managing your wealth. So that's going to be maximizing the business value, making sure you're maximizing, essentially having the right linchpin partner, the CEO of your fractional family office. And then what's the other one in manage? Well, yep. And then
manage the wheel of professionals.
Building the wheel of professionals. Yep. And then underneath grow, tax planning, one of the clearest ways to drive return on investment, investing like a billionaire, and then profit amplification, making sure you've got your business really dialed in because that's the golden goose. So as we go foreshadowing into the next several chapters, we're going to break down protect, manage, and grow sequentially. And we're going to start next chapter by diving into asset protection.
And by the way, when you do this right, the Fractional Family Office right, this should not be an expense. You should be getting an ROI on that. So it's an investment with a tremendous ROI. And I know we track that for our clients, and we do get a great ROI for our clients. When you're building this or working with somebody, there should be a well-defined ROI. This is one structure and one part of your wealth building, which is, I think, the most important, and also the one that will give you an ROI like nothing else. And you mentioned J.D. Rockefeller. There's a reason why in 1882, when he created this, he was worth $18 million, which was a lot of money in 1882. When he died in 1937, he was the world's first billionaire, 1.4 billion, and the wealthiest person on the planet. It's not the only reason, but a big reason why he retained so much of what he made is because of that family office that he had the foresight to create in 1882.
Yeah, I think one thing that's an amazing stat with J.D. Rockefeller, I believe when he passed away, it's estimated that his net worth was about 0.5% of GDP. So if you just inflation adjust his net worth, it's not as crazy as you would have thought. But if you apply the percentage of GDP to where we're at today, it's unimaginable about how much wealth he had accumulated at that point in time. So he definitely figured something out with that family office model.
Definitely. Smart guy.
All right, we'll be back next chapter breaking down asset protection strategies.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to the Make Rich Real podcast, where million-dollar businesses meet billionaire strategies. Please note the following disclosure. This podcast is provided by Dew Wealth Management, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice, tax advice, or legal advice, or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. Nothing discussed in this podcast constitutes a solicitation or offer to provide investment advisory services to any person in any jurisdiction where such solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities law of such jurisdiction. All information presented is believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. All investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance, if mentioned, is not indicative of future results, and no investment strategy can guarantee profit or loss. Any mention of specific securities, investment strategies, or market performance is for illustrative purposes only and should not be considered a recommendation. Economic and market conditions are subject to change, and any opinions expressed are currently only as of the date of this recording. Before making any investment decisions, please consult with a qualified financial professional who can assess your individual circumstances, risk tolerance, and investment objectives. For more information about our services and fees, please refer to our ADV Part 2A, which is available at our website, dewwealth.com, or upon request.